here's my background. Many of you know me. Before this, I started something called Beyond Core, which became Salesforce Einstein Discovery. So if you remember what was happening with smart data discovery, augmented analytics, so I'm partially to be blamed for that, and ended up writing a book called AI is a Waste of Money, precisely because I was embarrassed by what I had unleashed on the world. My concern was that if you're using AI without understanding what that AI is doing to your business, you can have massively bad unintended consequences. But that's my daughter, and that's part of the reason why I started the company, because I didn't want her to live in that world. I've invited a couple of my friends here today, Russ and Ted, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a second. And the reason I did that is the most common thing we kept hearing from customers is, this sounds too good to be true. And I was like, look, there's only one way I can handle this too good to be true nonsense, is by putting up real customers where you can understand what's going on, why does this work. It ain't magic, it's just a different approach to the problem. Russ, would you like to tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yes, definitely. Hi, Russ Lawrence here. I'm a DE with Optum Tech, part of UnitedHealth Group. I work in our office of our chief data scientist, and I work for our chief data scientist, and I manage a AI and ML team.
And Ted?
Yeah, I'm Ted Sortis. I'm with Cisco Systems. I'm part of the sales operations team, and I lead a sales analytics function that's in charge of sales planning. And I manage a team of data analysts, data engineers, and data scientists.
And one of the reasons I've invited the two of them is they came at the problem from two completely different directions. So Ted kind of saw it from an analytics first approach, whereas Russ started from a data science first approach. But in our dinner conversations, we just melded at that same place. So I think it'll be good for you to see that this is not about AI, this is not about analytics, this is about extracting value from data using all the tools at our disposal. So you guys might have heard this, that only about 10% of organizations are getting to financial benefits from AI. I live in Las Vegas right now, and I keep telling people if Las Vegas house had this bad odds, people would really start breaking stuff. So this is unacceptable. In fact, Gartner talks about that only about 50% go from pilot to production, and it takes 9 months. That is just not acceptable. So when we started the company, we set ourselves a crazy goal of how do we get customers to economic value in 30 days. And these are some of the things we did. In fact, what happened was something kind of really funny. Intel had heard about what we were doing, and they basically set a challenge to us. They're like, oh, really? You're going to get people to economic value in 30 days? Guess what? If you can do it, we'll pay for 25 such projects as long as you do some case studies around it. We were able to take their money. 20 of those projects are already live. 5 more are coming soon. But these are wide variety of use cases, wide variety of industries getting to value quickly. Why and how are we doing this? It's because you have to change your mindset from a human-first approach to an AI-first approach. What humans are very good at is hypothesis testing. I have a question, I have an idea, I have a hypothesis. I'm going to go test it, and can I do it very, very fast? So the first phase of AI made it easier for the human to do what it was doing faster. But it fundamentally didn't change the art of the possible. The second generation comes in and says, look, you actually need to go with a trawling approach, because that's what AI is good at. How do I cast a wide net, completely automated systems to do the first several steps to get to value, and then let people overlay human intuition and domain knowledge? The problem with this, though, is a trawler will catch some rubber tires and some dolphins, and unfortunately, you have to overlay human intuition and domain knowledge on top of that. Otherwise, you will also not get value. But remember the difference. You're using something at scale, then overlaying human intuition, as opposed to letting the human start the process and be controlled by that. So how does this approach work out? So if you think about where people are on this world, you're in the world of overwhelming data, or you've figured out what is valuable, you've figured out what is valuable insights, or maybe you've gotten to the world of optimal strategy. How am I going to behave differently based on AI? Finally, change management. How do I get people to behave differently based on what the AI tells them? If you don't figure out all of those steps, you can't get to value from AI. But there are ways to create value from AI at every step in this process. We have a capability called Sense, which is focused on augmented data prep. So in a matter of minutes, figuring out, is the data worth analyzing? Can I train an AI with this data? The second capability is Explore, which is augmented analytics, which is how do I figure out the key insights in the data completely automatically? How do I test out millions of hypotheses in seconds? Third is Optimize, which is focused on how do I figure out what this AI would do to my business? What would be the effect it would have? And then we go on to deploy and individualization and monitor, where you need to get that model in production. You need to tie it into Salesforce, into Tableau, into Power BI, your favorite tools that people use today, Domo, for example. And then you want to monitor what the impact of that AI was. And then finally, you have to go back and retrain the whole thing, because every AI will be wrong and the world keeps changing. So to talk about this, I'm actually going to go to Ted first from Cisco. We had this really interesting situation when we started working. Do you want to tell them what happened with Sense?
Sure. I think we met Arjit and we saw the product and we're really excited. And you could sense of Arjit's passion. And he tells, bring us a data set, any data set, and we'll show you what we can do. So the very first data set we brought to Arjit's team was from Salesforce.com, and our Salesforce is, we were a bit of a late adopter in terms of our sales process of bringing in Salesforce, so it's really dirty data. There's a lot of columns a lot of fields that were put into Salesforce that aren't very well populated. There isn't a lot of governance around it. People use it all sorts of different ways. So I took Arjit to the challenge. I did very little data cleanup. I brought the data as is, and immediately through the augmented data engineering, I was able to separate the good data from the bad data, and the bad data, well, it was also clearly marked in terms of what had missing data, so it wasn't usable, but then also it showed me what was heavily correlated with the good data, and it allowed us to make a judgment as to whether or not we wanted to bring that data into the model or if it needed some more cleanup. So that was the first one, and again, it just, it picked off everything that we had expected that we'd seen in previous data models, but this was all done within an hour, basically. The second attempt we had, my manager wasn't satisfied, and we gave another data set to Arjit and really didn't tell much about it. And it was a data that we'd actually slaved a building for several months. It was what I'd call a very pristine data set around our sales coverage. We wanted to look at the last 3 years of changes we made at sales coverage and try to figure out what's the ROI been. And for us, it's been challenging to figure that out because it's forced. We've had to go back and restate a lot of data that finance doesn't restate. So we gave the data to Arjit, and he found no findings. And we told him, great, that's exactly what we did, but we spent 3 weeks doing it, and Arjit's team spent not even overnight, right? We sent it to him at night, and we met with them first thing in the morning, and they apologized, saying we can't analyze his data set. We're not sure why we're not finding anything. And so it was just a test to see, like, what does he do with really dirty data, and what do they do with really clean data? And ultimately, they would have saved us weeks on projects that we would normally had a data scientist do manually.
And by the way, we were convinced that Cisco was hazing us because the guy who did that, Jonathan, is in the room. And we were like, the first project went so well, then they give us this thing, and there's nothing in there. They must be hazing us. And they gave it us late at night, and the meeting was early morning. But what was fascinating from my perspective, many of you start thinking, I gotta have clean data, otherwise I can't start the project. In the example you just heard, the clean data was the one that didn't have AI signal, and the thing that they thought was dirty data actually had signal and had value. So data for AI and data for BI is very different, and what you think is clean or dirty is different from what the AI can handle or can't handle. So that's why we built Sense, so that you don't have to think about it, just try it and see. And actually, Russ, you had an interesting example of this, right? So the chicken and egg problem, what happened there?
Yes, definitely. We were debating whether or not we were doing document analysis, and we're trying to figure out, should we be collecting data or shouldn't we be collecting data? And we went back and forth, and so we had an intern on we have an intern on our team. We actually have two, and we had her go and collect information and start working with Alex, and we started trying to decide how to structure the information. And so once we started structuring the information and collecting it, we started getting the minimum number of rows. So we had about 200 rows of data, and then we decided to put it into Sense. We put it into Sense, and then we went and converted and used Explore. And then all of a sudden we found out that what we've been doing, it's actually worth it, because now all of a sudden we're starting to see connections on keywords that are starting to pop up. And then we identified that once we saw that, we said, all right, let's go collect more information. So now we're in the process of collecting more and more information to enrich our data set, to find keywords within our document analysis project.
But this was another one that was funny for me. So Alex, who did that work, is also in the room. And we were like, there's this big meeting, and all the guys, like, Origin, you need to be on this meeting because this is a really important meeting. And we load up the data, and we were going to debate about it. I'm just like, just choose this outcome, press the button, see what happens. And 5 minutes later, we were done with the whole discussion because I think the meeting ended early because I was like, we're done. We have what we needed to do.
Yep.
But imagine if we had gone down the debate and discussion route, we would have been stuck there for 3-4 months. I have heard of stories where people are stuck on data projects for years. I don't know whether you've run that. The next one is actually with you as well. So this is when we went to the world of exploration. Now, to remind you, what exploration doing is you're looking at automatically through millions of variable combinations. So think of it as all the charts you could draw in a data set manually, the drill down charts, the group by charts, the statistical associations. You're just doing millions of them and then letting the AI present back what has value, what has the greatest signal net of every other variable. So what was, there was a funny case there with AI and BI disagreeing.
Yeah, this was really an interesting one, and I think this is a challenge that people will face as we start overlaying AI with our successes that we've had with BI. So if we start looking at specific dimensions and we say, yes, we've been successful around dimension 1, and what happened was we ran the process, we ran the AI, and then all of a sudden the AI was telling us that what our assumption was in our BI and our bias, that was actually not impactful for our outcome variable. So we started looking at it and we were thinking, you know, I got he got his attention. He started really looking at it, but then we realized it was correct because we were controlling for variables and we saw something, we thought a pattern, but the AI told us it actually wasn't a pattern. So in the end, what we're finding out and using through Explore is we find our top variables, we can find our hypothesis, and then we can actually apply the labor, the time and effort to the right spots versus having a known bias. And the bias is really, the BI bias is something we're going to struggle with because until we can continuously prove and trust in the data, people are still going to anchor on those dimensions where they've had success until they see that the outcomes that it's showing it's a negative impact. They're going to be able to believe and trust and say the AI is telling me the direction I should move in.
So Russ is being a little nice about this. I was sweating quite a bit because what happened was literally the AI was exactly contradicting what people knew to be true based on the BI. And I'm like, there's a bug here. Like, what the heck is going on? But thankfully, in Aible, you can click a button and see why it is telling you that it's not the pattern. So the real pattern was because of a completely different factor. Without that why, you cannot act upon AI. And this is really important. If an AI doesn't explain the why behind that contradiction, you're not going to get benefit because people won't trust it. But BI will lead you astray because correlation is not what you're looking for. You're looking for what net of all other variables explains the outcome, which is a very different thing. Anything you would like to add there?
It's just, it's a work in progress for us because people anchor around specific things they've been successful with. And over the course of time, we have to show them that the AI is actually going to be more beneficial and allow us to free up resources to focus on the right variables to look at going forward rather than what we've been successful for. We've actually got to change and look and say, these are the places we really need to look because that's the AI directing us.
And Ted, let's go to, because we had this thing where like you had done the same work before and spent some time on it. So could you tell the?
Yeah, the use case here was sales segmentation. So we, as we were going through the training of the Aible platform, we had just completed a big project as part of our annual sales planning process where we go and review over 100,000 accounts that we have as named accounts and make sure that they're assigned to the right sales coverage level, which then dictated the investment. And so literally had a meeting the next morning right after we got the data. And I thought, hey, could we just bring this into the Aible tool and just see what the analysis is? And so I was able to bring the data right out of Anaplan as a spreadsheet into Aible. I immediately saw what the decisions were that were made around the quality of the decisions. And I think the really, really impressive thing was I was able to just push a button and all these slides that Arj is showing went into, or all these graphics went into a slide deck. So I was actually able to go into the meeting next morning and do a readout of all the interesting patterns that we saw in terms of the decisions made around segmentation. So it just showed how quickly we can go from data to something presentable.
I remember you telling me that it really hurts you when data scientists spend time creating slides or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I tell my team, like, look, everyone's job here is to analyze. Like, that's what I want people focused on. And just the amount of time that you see people having to spend in PowerPoint, taking things out of, like out of Python, out of Tableau, and putting them into slides. While it's great and it's a good development exercise for the team, it's an opportunity cost. And so definitely when you showed me this, I'm like, I'm going to be using that a lot, and we have.
And one of the fundamental things behind this idea of augmented, the word gets used all the time, and it loses meaning if you keep using it all the time. Augmented means, does the AI guide me, and does the AI automate all the boring, the word I shouldn't say on being recorded, right? So the reality of this world is augmentation means giving people superpowers. The responsibility to interpret the patterns, look at the data doesn't go away. You can't say the AI told me so. But the AI can do so much for you that you can focus on the part where the human being is the only person who can actually overlay that intuition and domain knowledge. And actually, I think you had a second case as well.
So as we're going through the training, the next part was to look at optimize, and this has been something that's been really exciting for us when we first saw the product, because I have a PhD in mathematics, and one of his specialties is actually combining data science with operations research. So he's done a lot of extensive research in that. And we've been able to build a lot of really great prototypes where we look at linear and even nonlinear problems. The challenge is that for going from prototype to something in production, by the time you get input from all the different people, usually the models become unsolvable. Like there's just too many constraints. And so I wanted to understand better how to use this, and we use the same segmentation data. And what was really exciting here is we're able to take this data, and as we were working through the exercise to try to show what the value was in terms of how we segmented, what I realized there was real value actually in understanding the process and the decisions. And so when we went through this process, we quickly realized that we were able to identify a very different way of doing things next year with our sales planning team. We could probably compress a 2-week process where we have about 20 people reviewing accounts into just a several-day process, and identify which accounts are the most important ones to review. And we can even deliver back a savings amount in terms of how much we're saving in terms of this process. So it was a bit of a side benefit. I wanted to understand what happened in segmentation, and I realized I learned a lot about the segmentation process and all the decisions that had to be made. And so from a corporate perspective, we're able to deliver some real good value back to our business partners within the company.
And the interesting thing here was, what was that value? Because we were discussing what could be the value in this process. In your case, instead of people having to look at tens of thousands of things manually, you could focus it down to the few that mattered. So what's the impact of that? Like, how did you think about the business impact of doing this?
Yeah, we actually sat down with some of the different people involved. We found out how many minutes to hours they spent reviewing different customers and the complexity of it. And then the problem is when you get a big list, I mean, we can put as much enrichment as we want, but ultimately you have to go talk to people, right? And find out like what level of investment should we make in these accounts. And so, yeah, we basically measured, I think we could save something like $1.4 million from the company. But more importantly, this is the part that kicks off all of our planning. And so what we could do is we can remove a lot of the pain of the first 2 weeks of planning, make it a really smooth process, and have people really focus on the things that are transformational, because ultimately this is just operational now, right? It was a transformational initiative 3 years ago. So it adds a lot of value for us from being in corporate, but it's a cost savings as well to the rest of the company.
Absolutely. And we should tell the story, but I really feel this is the part where he tortured my team the most. But go ahead and tell them the story of what happened at UAG.
So we ran through our first use case, and I started, like Arjit said, with optimize. And what I found was the power of the confusion matrix. So in looking at it, true positive, false positive, getting down to the false negatives, what we really saw was the business benefit, the cost to the business, the penalty, and then when things are functioning correctly, a zero push. And what we were doing is going through all the numbers. And so as we started getting through the numbers and looking at them, I wanted to really understand the numbers that were being generated by Optimize. And so I worked with Alex and Jonathan, and we actually went through every single number. And I think I heard something earlier today, if you can't explain it, you don't understand it. So it was one of those things where we actually went through it. And the great thing was Jonathan and Alex and the team were open, and they were very excited about bringing this problem to them, to understanding the math, to breaking down each number, to understand how did this get generated, what was the, how did we start from the predictions of what happened to if we accepted the predictions, this is what would have happened, and really look at the net incremental benefit coming out of the use case. And so what we learned was the power of the confusion matrix can really help transform and take our business leaders and our business teams and have them understand what are the variables and the formulas that they can use and implement with the controls that they have and the levers to really guide them into using AI and ML to improve their process.
And for those of you who don't know what confusion matrix is, an AI makes a prediction. So let's say it tells you to take an action and it's right. That would be a true positive. It tells you to take an action and it's wrong. That's a false positive. It tells you to not act and it was wrong. That's a false negative, right? So that's what a confusion matrix is. And what was interesting about this conversation, if I remember this correctly, you were talking about how it helped you talk to business.
Yes.
Because you were not talking about data science metrics, you were talking about things they knew.
Yes, and from this point, about 4.5 months ago, what we learned was this is the new model of how we interact with our business team. So every meeting we've actually gone into now, we actually use the confusion matrix, but we don't put true positive, false negative in there. We actually label the quadrants benefit, cost, neutral, and then penalty. And then we show an example of how you can actually use the variables and the formulas to construct what essentially looks like your CBA, your cost benefit analysis, transfer that information to formulas, and then show the business teams this is the power that you have to control if you increase capacity, decrease capacity, if you want to focus on one thing more than another, how many pieces of widgets can a person work in a given month or a period. You can actually control that in real time and then show them what the benefit is and what the levers they have to pull that really helps them control and understand. All the time, it actually helps us then give us a bridge to then identify what's the correct model. And then as a team, we can talk about AUC, log loss, cost functions, and all the different models that are being run underneath without the business knowing and not getting afraid to say, they're bringing a new concept. They actually understand what we're trying to do. And so we bridge the gap using the confusion matrix with our business teams.
And Russ, did you want to add anything to that? Because you went through a very similar journey around unrealistic AI. Like, if only you could increase the sales team by 50 times and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, the world that I live in, we work a lot with management consultants, both externally, but also a lot of the people that are part of strategy and planning are ex-management consultants. And so, just listening to Russ's stories, it kind of puts a smile on my face. I told RJ yesterday during dinner, this is like the MBAs meet the data scientists, right? This is kind of that halfway point where the MBAs can bring in a lot of their insights in terms of how to structure business problems and measure economic value, which is something, quite frankly, the data scientists have struggled with, right? They understand the science and the accuracy of the models, but they're not really sure how to convey that to business value. And so that's the part that I'm really excited about. I think this is the part of the investment in Aible that we haven't fully realized the benefits of yet, and we're going to be identifying a lot of use cases as new projects come on. But it allows for a conversation, right? It's not like an assignment or an email that somebody says, try these parameters. You can just sit down and you can just hammer out different scenarios on the fly in a meeting. And so the interactiveness is really, really exciting.
Yes, I think the interactiveness is one of the big benefits too, is as you set up your formulas and your variables, you can, once you run your optimization, you can then change your variables or what your focus is in real time, and then you can see the impact on the decision that's being made.
And by the way, this is an important part to this is the security aspect. You can imagine working with UHG, working with Cisco, they don't trust us with their data. Like that would not happen. We came up with a different architecture where all the model training, model deployment happens in the customer's own cloud account. So we do not get read access to their account. We don't get username passwords to that account. We just get the permission to train models in that account. And you guys have been hearing a lot about synthetic data. I want to point out something. There's a fundamental danger to going down that approach. You're actually going to make a bad problem worse if you don't think this through. Why do we want to do synthetic data? Because we can't, two reasons. One is security, where you don't want to trust the analyst with the data for privacy reasons. The same thing is achieved here because the user cannot get access to the raw data either. And we built something called k-anonymity into the modeling, into the report, so that neither the model nor the human can look at clusters of data smaller than 25 by default. So you're solving the privacy issue at scale. Whereas if you throw algorithm that is going to try to hide the details of that data, and now you're training AI on it, you have no way of knowing whether the AI is picking up the signal in the original data or picking up the signal in the synthesization process. So that becomes a huge problem if you're not paying attention to that. And before I go to the second reason, any thoughts on that from either of you from a synthetic data and data security perspective?
I've questioned synthetic data. Our organization has a lot of data. So we should have capabilities, and as a team, we should be able to anonymize and de-identify our data to work with representative samples if we need, without going down the path to synthetic data. There's probably a small number of use cases that permissible use that might come up, but I think overall we have enough data where we should be able to de-identify and be able to work with a small sample or a representative sample to train our models.
Yeah, maybe I'll just talk about your architecture here. I think the real benefit is as a business user is a very fast approval process from IT, right? Is that Arjit's code doesn't come onto my premise, my data doesn't go onto his premise, so we're able to get a pilot up and running really quickly. So the architecture works great. And I'm learning more about this. I was asking Arjit, what's the synthetic data? Should I be doing something differently with how I'm doing my projects? And so Aible's been a really good business partner in terms of advising us on this. And so I'm learning more about this architecture, but I see other use cases that I think we should be able to try with this data security.
Yeah, and by the way, we are not sitting on our laurels. For example, we are working with Intel on doing zero trust architecture, where neither the cloud vendor, nor Intel, nor Aible would have access to the unencrypted data. So the cloud itself, where the data ends up at, will not have the ability to decrypt that data. So there's some interesting work happening here that can be done. The other reason people do synthetic data is they say, we have too little data. So we needed to kind of bootstrap that data by using synthetic data. Well, you yesterday said that you had done the smallest data set with us. Like, do you want to tell the story what that was?
We're working with Jonathan, and we've been presenting some pretty big data sets. I mean, like for pilot purposes, a few 100,000 rows. And typically we work with billions or millions or billions of rows. But one of my team members had actually been working on a pilot with a quick service restaurant, and they did some camera processing of cars that were going through the drive-through. And he got a sample data out of this engagement, and it was just a really tiny Excel spreadsheet. and we presented it to Jonathan and saying, do you think we could use this technology with our business value engineering teams, right? I think this is a really good opportunity for us to partner as business partners. And so we loaded up into the tool, and we saw some insights right away, right? And so we're really excited, not because we didn't think there were any insights in there, but it was an opportunity for us based on, I think it was like an hour's worth of data from one location of this big company that we can immediately go back to the customer and show insights and to Russ, your point, permission to keep going, right? To collect more data, to scale the project. And clearly what had happened here was that retailer hadn't had data scientists assigned yet to the project. Otherwise we would have seen model data. We wouldn't have been seeing raw data that was effectively out of a BI tool. I mean, so yeah.
Russ, do you think he did the smallest data set with us?
I don't know, we were talking earlier in the document analysis, we weren't sure, and I think we started with a minimum, we hit the minimum of 50, and so we were putting our features as columns and then the documents as our rows, and as we started collecting more, I think we're up to about 200 rows to get insights. And when we actually looked at Explore, if I remember, I think the combinations of variables tipped about 200,000, I think. I think it was in the range of about 200,000 different combinations that we were able to see. So small data, big impacts.
But what happens is the system did warn him that it was too little data. It's not like it's saying, hey, I don't need big, I would prefer to have better data. But you have a wide variety of algorithms, some designed for really small data, some that do really well when you have large amounts of data. The customer shouldn't have to deal with it. The system should use the right AI for the job. When you start out by saying, I need synthetic data to bootstrap the data, what you're really saying is, I really want to use an AI technique that requires large data. Well, that's a decision you took. You might as well use a technique that doesn't require large data if you want to do that. Now, key advice from you guys. I think, Russ, that was your key advice?
Yes, I think listen to the data. Like when we were talking earlier, I think the biggest thing I've learned is break your bias. What we've been successful with in the past doesn't necessarily mean we're going to be successful at in the future. Listen to the data, listen to the AI, and allow it to lead you in the direction of where the most value is coming out of your variables that you have in your data set.
And Ted, you're?
Yeah, and I gave a bit of a hint of mine, but I think it's an opportunity. We've heard over and over that this is a team sport. It extends beyond my data analysts, my data engineers, and my data scientists. We can easily bring in business stakeholders, sales leaders into our discussions and hide the complexity of data science models while presenting to them the value of the data science models. And we can do it in a way that's interactive and fast. And so, like I said, we're excited about this journey. This is something that's been missing from our technology stack that we recognize as a gap and a hole. And I'm looking forward to training the rest of my team and having everybody contribute to the data science work.
And I really think in changing times, and things are going to keep changing, in changing times, you need today's insights today. The world was so different 3 months back. The world will be different 3 months from now. You cannot have a process that takes a long time. So here's an example we did with Intel at Vertiv, where we got in 28 days, 4 distinct projects done. Come to the booth, you'll see this on the wall. There's a lot of information there. We did some interesting benchmark from Intel to show how serverless approaches are 3 to 4 times lower cost than server-oriented approaches. Here's the interesting catch though. This is if the server was shut down perfectly after the model training was done. You all know data scientists don't shut down their servers right after model training is done. They'll often keep it running for 3-4 months, which means the cost difference will be several hundred times compared to serverless, where the system is automatically coming up and immediately shutting down. Wide variety of use cases. Come by and see it at the booth, but I would always start for sales, marketing, collections, customer retention, these kind of use cases. We are partnered with some of the biggest companies out there. We have gotten lots of awards. I hate bragging about it. Come by the booth if you want to hear all that stuff. Do come by the booth if you want to see a full demo right after this. We just didn't have time for it. And both of them are going to be at the engagement zone, which is right outside registration. They'll be there from 6:30 to 7 if you have questions. Tomorrow, I'm in the data science and machine learning bake-off. So there'll be a CEO taking on 2 expert data scientists. You should come and be entertained. If I do badly, you can laugh at the CEO. If I do well, you shouldn't laugh at the data scientists. You should never laugh at data scientists. Obligatory Intel disclosures that I have to show on the screen. But thank you very much for coming. I really hope you guys will come to the booth and see a full demo, ask questions. This isn't hard. It just requires a different way of thinking about the problem. Thank you, everyone.